welcome to another edition of Sports Talk. I'm Frank Knoppenberger, your host, and I'm joined by longtime sports reporter John Haley. And if you've been around sports for the last 38 years, you've either seen him at games, you've read his articles, or if you're lucky enough to be involved or participate in his website. John, welcome. Thank you for sharing your time and your experience with us. First question, John, for the young people out there. Why and how did you get involved in sports reporting?
Well, my father, Gene Haley, who you knew very well, he was like a legendary reporter for the home news. And I was a junior in high school, and he just asked me what I wanted to do with my life, what I wanted to be. And I was like, I really have no idea. So he says, well, I'm working at the home news. If you want to pursue journalism, I can probably get your job over there. If you want to go to school locally at Rutgers. And I was like, man, sounds good to me, because I really had no idea. So then we went to he was covering the Knicks of all things, and I guess in the off season, whatever, at Madison Square Garden. And I went with him, and I was holding this typewriter. Back then.
Typewriter.
We're going way back. So we're on the way home, and I guess I'm about to be a senior, so he's like, if you're really serious about this, I can get you in. Take a typing class and your senior year. And so I thought about it, and I said, all right, I'll give it a shot. So I did that, and I was going to go to a school in Pennsylvania to run cross country, but then I decided to stay at Rutgers, and I stayed. Good. 38 years later.
You chose high school over college or pro. Is that by choice, or is that something that just evolved?
Well, yeah, it really wasn't a choice, because back then everybody starts out in high school sports, and back then, we're talking late '70s. I guess even now the aspirations are always to reach to the top, to cover the professionals. And I did some of that. Like in the off season, they'd let you go to some Mets games and some Yankee games, and Giants. And I really took to the high schools more than the pros, which was kind of rare, because it's usually the other way around.
Right.
Because I would go to a high school game, and when they saw you, their
Correct.
eyes were like, oh,
the
reporter's here. And you go to a Mets game or a Yankee game, they don't want you there.
Right, which reminds me of a story. We've known each other for 30-something years, a lot of stories together. Share with the audience and me one of my favorite stories, speaking of the Yankees, the Joe DiMaggio story. This is a true story, by the way, correct?
Yeah, true story. Summertime. Summer's when you get to, when the high schools are out, you get to these little perks with the, covering the professional events and stuff like that. So I went to a golf tournament, one of these celebrity golf tournaments up in Upper Montclair Country Club, and I saw Joe DiMaggio there. So I wasn't really, they just said, just come back with any kind of story, whatever you come up with. So I said, I'm going to ask Joe DiMaggio, what he thinks of the game of baseball today, whatever the big topic was. So I asked him. So I introduced myself. I said, Mr. DiMaggio, I think I said Joe. Joe, John Haley, News Tribune. I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. And he says, excuse me, son, but I have to use the bathroom. And then Joe went into the bathroom, never came out.
So you're still waiting.
He went out the other door. The country club clubhouse. Right. They have all the doors, and he just went out. So I asked the guy who was running the tournament. I said, "You know where Joe DiMaggio is? Oh, he's out on the second tee." Oh.
Well, he was a tough character. Everything I read, to reporters and everyone. What suggestion would you give to a young man that in high school and wants to pick this as a career?
Well, it's more challenging now than ever, because if you want to be a newspaper reporter, there's going to be no more newspapers. I mean, that's in 5 years. But a lot of the newspapers now are gearing everything towards like online, and it's the online product is the principles are still the same principles as far as like reporting goes, how you attack a story, but. With that being said, aside from the newspapers, everybody and their brother, including myself now, are having their own websites, and they hire people who, don't have the training, the proper training, college or whatever. So it's very, very, very challenging, but it's a great profession. I'm glad that I chose that.
Now you talked about principles and rapport. You were able to gain that from the high school coaches that I know. and everyone knowing, just like your dad,
Mm-hmm.
everything's positive. You always report the positive. For instance, I know you and I had a discussion. If Frank Knoppenberger made an error to lost a game, you wouldn't say Frank Knoppenberger lost the
Yeah.
game by an error. You'd say there was an error.
Right.
And so that's what people admire about you. But how do you develop that rapport with the coaches, especially when there's times, I'm sure there's some disagreements in a selection of an all-star or a report of a game?
Well, I think, what you said before, I think that's a matter of, like, you don't mention a kid that make an error or whatever, and I think you gain trust from the coaches. And I've learned everything from, like, my dad, like, as far as, like I said, being positive and all that. And I think the coaches, and being fair. I think I've always been, like, fair.
I agree.
Because I'm always trying to promote the county. I don't have a preference for a team or anything like that. And I think you gain a trust over the years.
Right, which I think you have. In your 38 years, you've seen many changes, I'm sure, as I have, in high school sports. Would you care to comment on a couple that maybe have impacted the game of basketball or football or just the whole high school situation?
In basketball, obviously, the three-point shot, which came into existence in 1986-87 season.
My last year. You remind me of this all the time.
But I mean, other than that, I can't really. I mean, the games are pretty much the same. But I mean, as far one big thing is obviously the specialization.
Right.
And it seems like you almost have to choose a sport when you're 9 and 10 years old, which one you want to play, because now parents are so conscious of college scholarships and everything is so competitive. And that always bugged me, because there's so many athletes, great athletes out there who are just concentrating on one sport, and that's the biggest change. And now they're also, they're getting personal training in these sports.
Correct.
So I think the talent level is better, and kids are more skilled because of that.
I agree.
But they're locked into one sport.
We'll talk about your favorite athletes and that sort of thing, but the three-point shot in that 85, 86, you did an article. Remember, you polled everyone, the coaches. Do you recall, did the majority of the high school coaches at that time wanted the three-point shot, were in favor or not?
They didn't.
Nobody didn't.
The majority was against it, including myself.
Including me?
Being because we're old.
Right, we were old school, and you and I talked. We felt that it was going to change the game, and it did. But and I thought they would take strategy away from the game, but it added to it.
Well, recently I did the history of the three-point shot on theauthoritysports.com, which you can look up.
Right.
And I ran like 13 different charts of every school's all-time leader, the leaders for one season, most in a game. So I did I know you like the story with the fewest amount of three-pointers. So the most three-pointers, in a season is I think there's like 8 or 9 guys who have had over 100. Team-wise, I think the record is like 156 or something crazy number like that. But the fewest was Sayreville. I guess when the first
year,
came,
I believe,
and they made one three-pointer as a team, and it was Bill Tomzik, because he was like fading out of bounds, like with 1 second left on the clock, he put it in.
But the problem was the kids weren't growing up shooting the three like they are now. And I think that's why it's the three-point shot is so more effective this year, currently, and exciting. How about your favorite memories? Any favorite memories in your 38 years?
I knew you were going to ask me this. Actually, I wrote down a few.
Okay, good.
Well, believe it or not, most people know me from basketball and football, but I also did track and field for many years, and a lot of my favorite memories are from track and field, being at the Penn Relays. I always say that if you're a sports fan, you should go to the Penn Relays at least once in your lifetime. It's an experience.
That's good.
It's a 3-day event on Saturdays.
And as a matter of fact, John, I've taken your advice and I did go with Sam Mattis.
It's crazy,
I had
right?
to leave the school one day and said I'm going down there, but you're right.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. So like it's a 3-day event, and on Saturday, it's they have when the world of track and field comes together. They'll have elementary school races and high school Olympians, professionals from all different countries. It's just crazy. But on Saturdays, the high school kids are running there before 50,000 people cheering. And it's the only sport in high school where you know, at least in New Jersey, where you're going to get that. And I remember in 1997, the Metuchen 4x4 team, they made it to what they call the Championship of America, and it was on national television because they were following some team from California that was going for like the world record or something like that. And there was Metuchen. They finished third in a state record at the time. And then later on that year, they went down to the national championship at North Carolina State, and I went down there, and they won it, and they set a new state record, and it was just.
I remember that team.
Tremendous.
Excluding that team, do you have a favorite team in basketball or football? Do you remember watching and saying, "Wow, that was a great team to watch"? And
yeah, you know,
or basketball.
Actually, my answer, I hate to say it because it's happened just this past season, and you don't want to be one of those where it's the last thing that you think of.
Correct.
However, I mean, I did go on record basically saying that this the St. Joe's team. I'm sorry, not this past season. 2 seasons ago, when Carl Towns was there, that was the best. I mean, they had 4 Division I players on the court, and 3 of them are, 2 of them were major college, and just the way they played it is just.
So that made it
tremendous. Maybe
the best team, but that was your favorite team to watch? Teams, let's exclude East Brunswick because every one of them is my favorite. How about the South Plainfield team with Bitsy and then this year's
Marquise
Colonia
Jones.
team and Mark? Right.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with in the early '80s. St. Peter's had a group when they had Jeff White, Eric Young, Alan Cook, Charlie Roberts, and they played St. Anthony. Bob Hurley was coaching even back then. They played him 3 years in a row in a state championship. Lost all 3 games, but those teams were just, that was a long, long time ago, and that still sticks out in my mind.
Right, I remember watching those teams.
Like you said, those, and then in the mid-'90s, you had the Piscataway team that went to the tournament champion semifinals with John Celestin and Justin Bailey, Division I backcourt. Those teams, St. Peter's, and then when you want to go into the 2000s, you had that 3-year run with South Plainfield when they had Marquise Jones and Darren Campbell, and all 3 of those teams, it was all about defense. It was just a remarkable defense, as opposed to the St. Joe's team I was talking about. They were a more offensive group. But those teams stick out.
Yeah, and that's what makes it exciting. And the East Brunswick teams under Bo Henning, they were exciting, in my opinion, to watch because we played good man D and we shot the 3.
Right.
And but they were my favorite teams. But you can have yours. How about your favorite athlete?
I was gonna mention them next.
Yeah. Okay. Your favorite athlete?
Okay.
Or athletes. Give me 2 or 3. I don't want to put you on the spot.
Well, answering that last question, when I said there was fairly recent. As far as my favorite athlete, Kenny Jackson, no questions asked, and there was I don't even think like a close second. Kenny Jackson, as you know, a 4-sport athlete at South River.
Right.
Went on to play at Penn State and then the Philadelphia Eagles, and just the things that he could do.
Well, he was a state champ 2 years in a row in the sprint, and then he was probably all-state in football, I'm sure all-county in basketball. He may have been the best all-around athlete I've seen also. Do you go back? Can you go back later? How about from the 70s? Oh, he was late 70s.
79 when I first started, really.
Right.
77 I started.
Okay, prior to that, you don't remember like the Pearsons and the Thiesmans and the Taylors from Perth?
Well, I mean, I know from, talking to my father, Brian Taylor, in my father's opinion, was the best athlete to ever come out of Middlesex County.
But what's your favorite sport to cover, John, and why?
At first, it'll sound like a cop-out because whatever season it is, that's my favorite season. Because when it's football, I am like wrapped up in football. That's all I'm focused on. The day after football, all the all-county stuff's done. That's in my rearview mirror. Now it's like basketball. But I will say, if I did have to pick one, it would be basketball because basketball is like it's almost like a lifestyle. Like you go to it starts with the holiday tournaments. You're at an event all day, 5 games, 6 games, for 2 or 3 days in a row. You're seeing
Right.
people and you're talking hoops and talking. Then you get to the showcases, and it's like you're there all day for 3 days, and then you get to the tournament time, and it's
Right.
just whereas the other sports it's a game. You're covering a game.
Any favorite track athletes besides that
I was
Metuchen group?
always partial to the 400 meters because you have like, the blend of the sprint, and even like a little bit of a distance race where you have to you have to pace yourself, but then that last quarter mile you're a sprinter, so I think you have like both of those elements.
Yeah.
Bryant McCombs from Old Bridge was a national
Right.
champion, went on to Texas A&M. Tyrone Ross from Metuchen. These are just spectacular.
And I think you covered our kid Matt, Sam Mattis, right?
Sam Mattis.
Right. You said the word impartial,
Tremendous.
John, which makes me ask the next question.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get that Metuchen out of you? And I know you've mentioned Metuchen a few, and become impartial? Because no matter what anyone says, they have favorites. They have favorite coaches, they have favorite players. How do you remain so impartial?
Well, I learned that from my dad in the late 1970s because I was just in the business, and I covered my old high school, Metuchen High School, county tournament against St. Mary's of Perth Amboy, which no longer exists.
Right.
Remember Ralph Kostas?
Yes.
He was a star of that team. Metuchen's winning the whole game. I know kids on the team, and then St. Mary's made this great comeback and like beat them, and I'm like, whoa! So I have to write my story, and I was like, I don't know how to write this because I just watched this game from one team's point of view. And I told my father I was having an issue with it because we worked together, and we went out afterwards, stopped at the diner, and he just gave me the whole lowdown about how you have to watch the game from, there's no allegiances, there's nothing going on. This is how you do it,
Right.
and I've learned to do that ever since. I will go into an event rooting for. I'll never ever root for a team. I don't care who wins or loses, but sometimes I'll root for the story. You know what I mean? If this team upsets this team, this is going to be a big story. So I find myself maybe rooting for this team because I'm rooting for the story.
Right.
But I'm still able to, if it doesn't happen, I still feel I can write it.
But you'll root for East Brunswick in the state championship football game from out of county. You're all partial to Middlesex County, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I consider myself the ambassador for Middlesex County sports.
Right.
And anytime, even if it's a regular season game and East Brunswick's playing, West Windsor or whatever, of course I'm going to root from East Brunswick because again, I'm also rooting for the story because I'm writing this from a Middlesex County point of view.
Right. Let's go back to basketball. I know I'm jumping around. And you and I are doing the draft, and you get your first. Who's going to be your first 5 or 6 players that you've covered? You're going to go with Towns. And you would go with the big guy over a point guard, or a guard like Salistan, or a shooter. Like
Carl Towns is going to be the first pick in the NBA draft. I'm going to go with Carl Towns.
Okay.
He's 7'1" in high school.
All right. Well, I'm not arguing that. I'm just making.
But my next 5 picks might be all point guards.
Yeah, and there's a lot of great players. Who would be 2, 3, 4? Anybody in mind?
All right.
I know it's difficult, but that's what everyone wants to hear out there.
I guess I'm going to have to give you the ones that come off the top of my head because 38 years, 40 years, I mean.
Right.
There's a lot of guys who went on to like major Division I, the NBA.
Well, you never covered a Dave Wall, who's still in the NBA, and played, I don't know, 15 years as a point guard. Celestin. Did you cover Gary Brokaw? No, a little. Well, he's our age, I think. That's why, right? From New Brunswick. Gary, a little older than you?
I'm not that old.
Oh, sorry. So
I saw Gary Brokaw play in the county final against Metuchen in 1971. I was 11.
Well, you should write about that.
He scored 48 points, but Metuchen beat him. My brother was on that team.
Wow. John, we mentioned quickly, we're running out of time here.
I'm off the hook with my top 5. Go ahead.
Yeah. Tell us about your website, because I know I belong to it and I read it every morning, and it gives you inside stories and human interest stories. Tell us how someone can, tell me what it's all about and how they can get involved in participating.
Yeah, it's theauthoritysports.com. all one word, lowercase. Everybody says the Sports Authority. It's just the reverse of Sports Authority. But yeah, I launched the site in September. It focused strictly on Middlesex County sports. Right now I'm doing like football and soccer and basketball, softball and lacrosse, and then hopefully it'll emerge into like multiple sports. What I do is my site is a pay site. Okay, it's $10 a month to get on. The first month is $1, and $2.50 or 25% of that money goes back to the school's athletic department, and they can do with what they choose with it. So since I'm a pay site, I feel I have to have something that the other sites don't have. So I do I do these all-access videos, which have become pretty popular, where I'll go into the locker room, football and basketball, before the game, hear the pregame speeches, and then at halftime they'll do they'll go over the adjustments and all the yelling and screaming and stuff going on, and then have video clips during the game. Then after the game, the reaction, whether they win or they lose, and those have been pretty popular. And I do I do a lot of videos, multiple videos when I cover a game. When I cover a game, that'll be my focus for that day, and
right.
I'll play it up like it's pictures and a fan reaction, and I do a lot of, I think, cool, unique, innovative things.
Right. That must take a lot of work. How do you attain all that? How do you get all that information? That's why you're up late at night?
It's a lot of work, hours every day. But I'm passionate about it. I love it. I love doing it. It's like a labor of love. And
where do you see that in a year? What's your hope that will happen with it?
I think about that all the time. I just have so many ideas running through my head. like trivia contests and hooking up with local restaurants and stuff, and just the coverage itself. Once I'm able to get established and make a few dollars, which I'm starting to now, then I can hire more people, take the workload off myself, and maybe then I can focus on a lot more things. So I see it just getting better by the day.
All right. John, I know I cut you off, or maybe you're trying to avoid it, but we were talking about your top all-time players in high school in Middlesex County. Let's continue that.
Okay. This is a loaded question because this is all at the top of my head, and
Correct.
I might go back and say I forgot this guy, I forgot that guy, but I mean, just at the top of my head, Carl Towns.
Right.
I mean, anybody could argue that. Then I would go. The rest of them would probably be guards. Jay Williams in high school. John Celestin would be on that team. Keith Hughes would have to be on that team. Carteret. And most people probably know who those players are because they went on to college/NBA careers. But I think at number 5, I might have to pick Earl Summers from New Brunswick, who was just
he's dominated since his freshman year.
Spectacular. Still has the best high school dunk I've ever seen before. Those are the names that come to mind. I mean, there were so many great players.
Right.
Gary Battle, Quentin DeCosi, Artie Flaherty, Eric Young, all those guys from St. Peter's.
You didn't see Tommy play. You did.
I didn't cover Tommy Flaherty.
Tommy Smoji was a player.
Gary Brokaw,
right.
Brian Taylor. I know the names from my father.
John, I seen you brought some photos here, some black and white, vintage, old-time photos here. First one we're looking at here, I believe that's John Smoji. Tell us about that.
John Smoji, what a classic picture that is. Look at the development, his legs. Unbelievable.
Well, wasn't that his thing, his thick legs? And how many points would have he scored if the three-point shot was around?
Well, he finished with 3,100. I don't know, 4,000?
Yeah,
but the thing is, he also got to the foul line. One of my favorite statistics of all time, he scored 1,000 points from the foul line.
Really?
1,000 points from the foul line, like 1,003 or something.
This next one, a little bit embarrassing for me. Whew. Tell us about that one. You remember everyone in the picture, I'm sure.
Yeah. The theme was how this team was all business. I don't know how I came up with that, but so it was at the Metuchen train station. They all had, one guy had a paper, umbrella, a cup of coffee, and then they had these little attaché cases. They're actually basketballs, but they're supposed to be the cases, which I believe your wife
She made those.
made.
Right?
Lenore Summers, all the way on the left, is one of my top favorite basketball players, one of the best basketball players all time, Middlesex history, New Brunswick High School.
Right.
Never, played in college or the pros or anything like that. Tremendous. East Brunswick.
Keith Modesesky.
Keith Hughes, another one of my all-time favorites. God rest his soul. He
Right.
died less than a year ago. Tremendous player at Rutgers, drafted in the NBA, played overseas. Love that kid. Gary Smith, he was a little underrated. He played
Right.
on that
the Carteret team, right?
played on that Carteret team. First year of the GMC tournament, when they changed it from Middlesex County, they played in the final. Lenore against Keith Hughes. Keith had 40. Lenore had like 32. The place was going crazy.
Right.
Almost 6,000 people there. Carteret beat him, I think, by 2.
Or maybe in overtime.
I don't know. I had to look that up. And there's Mr. Knopp and William Pennyfeather. I'm just looking at this picture. I just dug him out.
You forgot the penny feathers.
Yeah, William Pennyfeather played professional baseball. I had a couple cups of coffee with the Pirates and the Reds.
That was from
Perth Amboy.
Perth Amboy. This one, there's some.
Wow.
Wow. For the old timers, this is the 80s, early 80s. That's, I think, on the piano
this
there
is like 84, 85.
Coach Tisdale on the piano.
Bob Tisdale, he was the coach of the year. The theme of this one was how they all scored 1,000 points, which nowadays is not that big of a deal, but back then they all scored 1,000 points, so they were all sitting around a grand piano, and at the high grand as in 1,000. Eric Young, 14-year Major League Baseball player,
Right.
on the left. Larry Bornheimer, great shooter for St. Joseph Metuchen, East Brunswick resident.
Assumption. And you know what he used to do? He used to play against the Globetrotters.
Really?
He played for what they call the Washington Generals. Is that the
Really?
name of that thing? Yeah. I spoke
You
to
should
him
have told me
just a
about that. I
couple
would have
weeks
done a
ago.
story on it.
Oh, jeez.
Artie Flaherty, 2,000-point scorer. There's only 7 2,000-point scorers in Middlesex County history. He's one of them. Jeff White. If you ask me my top 10 players of all time, he's in it.
And then
Keith again.
Keith Hughes again.
So sad.
Right. Now this is
That's the BT Express himself, Brian
The
Taylor.
BT
That's what he
Express.
calls himself.
he,
That was in a state championship game at
Was it
Atlantic City,
Right.
1968,
Would it be
against
Asbury?
Neptune. I think it was.
He's one of the best. He's an NBAer.
NBAer.
ABAer, I should say.
Both.
Okay.
Led the county in scoring in basketball and football, and he told me that baseball was his best sport.
And then this is, as we both agree, one of the best athletes ever.
He
Kenny Jackson, right?
he was being recruited. Well, he went to Penn State for football. He was being recruited by Larry Brown when Larry Brown was at UCLA for basketball, and he said that if I think Rod Smith was the other guard. He said if I had Rod Smith and Kenny Jackson, it'd be the fastest backcourt in the history of college basketball. And of course, he played baseball for 3 years and then runs track his senior year and
Right.
was a state champion. One of my greatest moments was that he ran against in the 100-meter dash final at Rutgers against Jonathan Williams from Somerville, who went on to play for the New England Patriots. And Williams beat him by 1/10 of a second. It was electrifying.
And again, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. I appreciate everything you've done for high school sports and selfishly what you've done to East Brunswick. I think you've always been more than fair and gave us great coverage. We always appreciate that. So on behalf of the parents, present and past, athletes and coaches, thank you for what you've done for East Brunswick. The GMC thanks you for everything you've done for them. And it was a pleasure having you here, and hopefully you'll come back, and best of luck on your website.
Thanks, Frank. It was a lot of fun.